start off by apologising for the fact that you've come to listen to someone from the UK and you might have been hoping for this really lovely, posh English accent, and that's not what you're getting. So yes, I did my early work in learning disability services in New Zealand. I went to the UK in about 1991 when I started working for United Response, and started working with Jim a few years later in terms of developing active support in the organisation. And since then I've been involved in a whole range of things, including the development of a number of resources, the latest of which is this DVD, which you can see up here. I live in the lovely city of York, so I'm not even from London, which is the other thing that you might expect from someone that's come over from the UK. So today what I'm going to do is kind of talk you through our experience of implementing active support, which was the real focus around our person-centred approaches when I joined the organisation, and how that's led us on to understand the importance of practice leadership and how that then relates to the development of other person-centred approaches. And I'm going to try and give you the kind of warts and all kind of situation there, because I think it's really important that organisations can be honest about where they actually are in developing person-centred approaches. So United Response is a national charity. It's a very large charity. We employ over 3,500 staff. We support over 2,000 people with learning disabilities across England and Wales. It's very dispersed. And there's a whole range of services, from supporting someone for an hour a day, or an hour a week even, through to 24/7 support in group home type situations. We support people with learning disabilities, people with physical disabilities, people on the autistic spectrum. We support people with acquired brain injury. There's a whole range of people that we support. A significant number of the people we support present behaviours which would be described as challenging. United Response was the first organisation to implement active support as a kind of organisational kind of imperative, and it became policy. Now, a number of organisations have done that since, in the UK and here. So it's been really interesting the last few days to find out a bit more about that. So I joined United Response in the early 90s. In 1995, I became the area manager for the services in York. And up until then, I'd been doing my own little thing in my the day service that I set up. And so I hadn't really been involved in very many of their other services. And I brought my own little kind of culture and way of working with me from New Zealand. So I was doing things in my service very much the way I did them. And it was a bit of a kind of revelation when I started to get involved in some of the other services, and particularly the residential services. So a lot of those services were small group homes that had been created because the large institution had closed down, and so people had moved in. And a number of those people had been in services for a couple of years. And United Response had a really good reputation. It was I was very keen about the work they were doing. It was a very values-based organisation. There was lots of really good things about it. I think it was only when I really started to be responsible for managing those services that I started to realise some of the flaws in that. So the first one was really that it was very values-based, and there was lots of values training, but that was pretty much all the training that staff got. So there was this kind of approach to it that was, we're good people, providing, being nice to people, doing the right things, and that actually that was enough. If we believed the right things and we were nice people, that actually we'd be able to provide the right kind of support. So there was no kind of really structured thinking about what skills people might need to have, or the kind of the complexities of the work in lots of ways. So staff weren't very skilled. What I really picked up was the ideas, the values, those sorts of statements we were working to at the time, which were things like normalisation, the 5 accomplishments, all of those sorts of things, had become really simplified. They'd almost just become really simple messages. The area manager before me would just kind of say things like, it's just treating people normally. You speak to people as you would speak to each other. That kind of really simplification of things, so that actually, that doesn't make any sense. If a person doesn't understand their communication, there's no point talking to them in the way I'm talking to you. But that didn't seem to have that wasn't permeating through. So hence we had some very frustrated people that we were supporting because I couldn't understand anything that was going on around them. The concept of community care, which was really big, obviously in terms of the deinstitutionalisation in the UK, had become really oversimplified into this, that's just about being out in the community. So there was a real focus on getting everything done so that you could then go out. But there was no kind of focus on what people did once they get out into the community, so there was just this kind of, lots of people kind of being traipsed around, you know, lots of staff wandering around with people we support wandering behind them with really kind of no idea or concept of how to actually get engaged with the community, things that were going on. So there was a lot of, in terms of the support that was being provided, well, it wasn't really support, it was care. So there was an awful lot of just doing things for and looking after people, you know, very much that kind of hotel service. Oh, do you want a cup of tea? I'll make you a cup of tea. Everything being done for people. And people having long periods then of just waiting around for things to happen. That was particularly true for people with more severe and profound disabilities. I think there's this kind of split that happens where we see someone as a bit more able, where they might learn or they might be able to do things themselves, then actually staff would kind of not assume to make them a cup of tea. You can go make your own, or I'll help you make one, but eventually you'll get it, so you'll be able to do it yourself. But certainly for people with more severe and profound disabilities, there was this kind of idea that actually people would never really be able to do it on their own, and actually it was easier and quicker, and you know, why make them do that? You know, it's so much nicer if you just do things for people than actually kind of engaging them in it. There was certainly, what I picked up was this aversion actually to anything that was about structure and routine. That was very much seen as what those big bad institutions had, and we don't have that. So I had staff that were kind of saying things like, well, we just go with the flow. You know, kind of you just see what happens. And looking at how that affected the people we were supporting, what it meant was they had no idea what was going to happen from one day to the next. And so actually, for a lot of people since they'd moved in, there was actually an increase in levels of challenging behaviour because people just didn't have any kind of idea, there was no sense of what was going to happen. So in the York services in particular, because that was pretty much what I picked up across the whole organisation, in the York services in particular, there were, as I came into that post, there was one service in particular that was a real problem that actually had been recognised nationally as one of the United Response's biggest concerns. It was a service for 8 people, and it was kind of a house and a converted stables, so 5 people in the house, 3 people in the stables, high levels of challenging behaviour. Staff weren't coping with that at all. There was this sense of that actually the sign of a good day was actually that you kind of just got through the day and no one was taken to hospital. You know, no ambulances were called. And so people were just kind of coping, and it was chaos. It really was quite chaotic in terms of what people were doing. So there was a real lack of any kind of structure. Staff weren't skilled. They'd had no training in how to support people with challenges. They had no idea. They had no coping strategies at all. And it was really just kind of sitting around and hoping for the best. There was no support for those people, so that they would, when things got into crisis, there was no one to call, or the person that you did call wasn't able to offer any real advice or any support. I remember staff member telling me one day that a person they support had become more and more distressed. They'd actually been self-injuring, so banging their head against the radiator for about half an hour, and she just couldn't bear it any longer. She phoned the on-call, and the on-call person said, "Why don't you give him a nice hot bath?" And she said, "I just despaired. You know, what I wanted was some really practical help." And what I got was this glib response about, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if you could have a bubble bath?" So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about that, really. That service was, again, a real issue, and it was one of the places where actually I learned a lot in terms of what we needed to do. So it was very chaotic, as I said, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the people that lived there. It's actually the guy who was banging his head against the radiator. So his name is Doug, and he'd been living there for some time. Doug's levels of self-injury were very high, so 90 incidents a month on average, that kind of. And when I spent some time with Doug, I realised that actually, again, that idea that nobody knew what was going to happen. And there was a range of things that Doug liked to do, but there was one thing in particular that he was quite clear about, and I could completely understand, in that Doug liked to go for a walk. He liked to get away from the place every now and again. Now, Doug had no verbal communication, he didn't use words to communicate, but he could communicate quite clearly. And one of the things that he would do is, when he wanted to go for a walk, is he would bring his boots. He would go and he would get his boots, and he would either give them to you or throw them at you, or he would make it clear that that's what he wanted to do. And those were very well-intentioned staff, so actually what they would tend to do is try and do that as best they could in the chaos that they were in. So sometimes that meant staff could immediately say, yes, okay, let's go. So put the boots on and we'll go out for a walk. Sometimes they were well-intentioned and they would say, so yes, but I'll just have to go and do this first. So they would go off, and sometimes they would come back 10 or 15 minutes later. And sometimes they'd get distracted and go off and do something else. And sometimes it was just chaos, and they just had to say, no, we can't go. So one of the things that seemed to make sense to me was that in order just to make things better for Doug every day, we could just make sure that he could go for a walk in the morning and the afternoon. It's a fairly small thing. I think it'd be quite easy to do. There's plenty of staff around. The more problems there'd been in the service, the more they just added staff to the point where you couldn't get any more staff in the building. There were high staffing levels. It hadn't made things any better. In fact, I think it probably made things worse. So I said, so let's do that. Let's just make sure that he can go for a walk at 11 o'clock in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I put that to the staff, and they said, no, we can't do that. We can't promise that. We just can't do that. It's too unpredictable. Things are too chaotic. We can't do that. So what we actually had to do in order to get that to happen was really actually look at the whole structure of every day and think about where everyone was going to be. And we actually had to begin to really kind of put some routines and some structures in place. And we had to write those up. And it had to be fairly quick because, Doug was really, really hurting himself. So we did that, actually the manager and I did that. I remember being sat in my front room with loads of flip chart, kind of working out how this was going to work and where staff had to be at any particular point in the day to be able to support people, and how we could preempt some other people's behaviour by making sure that they actually had things to do. And I have to admit, I remember going into the team meeting thinking, these poor staff are so stressed, and I'm going to bring in this shift plan that's kind of very detailed. And I thought, oh, they're going to hate me. I had this real fear that they were just going to collapse or kind of get really angry. And what was really interesting is when I gave it to them, they all there was a few moments where everyone kind of looked through it. I was waiting. And there was almost this huge sigh of relief in the room. And a number of the staff said, thank goodness someone's finally going to tell us what we actually need to do. So it worked really well. Now for Doug, the impact was significant and very quick, in fact. So you can see why they kind of go here. You can see the point where it goes down. That's where we introduced that shift plan. And actually within 4 weeks of that being introduced, just a month, it didn't take long for that to kind of kick in. Because he could predict what was going to happen, and he got out regularly. The things that he wanted to happen started to happen. His challenging behaviour reduced, and so the number of incidents of self-injury dropped significantly, and actually have remained fairly low for a number of years. Now, that's where Jim became involved actually, because Jim had heard about the service. Jim had just become a trustee about the same time that I became area manager. So he became a trustee for United Response, and so he'd heard about the service. It was one of the first things they told him about when he arrived. So he kind of made his way up to York, and by that time we'd implemented this stuff. And I remember sitting down with him and saying, actually, what you've done there is something that we call active support, which was a bit of a revelation for me because I didn't know I had a name. And I got quite excited about that because I could go off and do all sorts of things with that. And Jim would then actually be able to help us in York in terms of actually formalising that a bit more, training the staff in a few more techniques and ways of working with people so that we could actually get things to be better and better. And then Jim kind of used that as an example to be able to say to the rest of the organisation, this is what you should be doing. This is the way that you should be working with people. This is the right thing to do. So shortly after that, United Response adopted active support as a national way of working. So we had to do a number of things in order to make sure that that we could actually do that again, a large organisation, even way back then, to get that to happen. So the first thing we did was made sure it was in all our policies, that it was very clearly in there, and that there was a requirement. We made it a requirement for people that they had to, begin implementing it, and that there was an expectation that in the next year or 2 years that actually all services would be, working this way, and it would become a matter of that's the way we do things in United Response. We continued to work with the Tizard Centre and with Jim, and later Julie, to ensure that we actually had someone else coming in to tell us how to get that right. We developed our own internal expertise by getting some pilots, some groups of people who were very interested and very keen, certainly at that starting point, so that we had across the organisation some really good examples that we could point people to, and we had people in local areas that could talk knowledgeably about what was going to happen. We also created a steering group that kept an eye on how it was actually being implemented during that time. We introduced mandatory active support training, so everyone had to do active support training, and actually that was throughout the organisation, so everybody did active support training. The trustees did active support training, the directors did active support training, the area managers, service managers, staff, everyone did something that was about finding out what this was actually about. And we appointed a national coordinator, and that would be me. I ended up being the person that had responsibility for kind of devising all the training and helping people to get it implemented. I know it's a long story, and there's lots of things that happened in between, and I'm not going to kind of go and go about that for a lot too long. But there are a number of things that have happened between the 1998 and now. So a number of things have kind of happened organisationally. The development of a practice development team, so we did get to the point where we decided actually I couldn't cover the whole country. So we appointed a few more people to help, but not many more. Actually, there are still only 3 of us. And there's a real reason for that. That's about actually saying, because actually it needs to be part of the organisation, it needs to be part of the system. So you don't want it to be all about consultants who come in and do this stuff. You want it to be embedded. So, but that additional support's still available. We developed a framework to kind of help staff think beyond just active support and start thinking about the other person-centred approaches. So we have something that we call the Way We Work framework. It's very well branded in the organisation. Everybody knows about it. You hear about it from recruitment to all the training you do. And it's a kind of visual representation of how you use different approaches at different times to get your support to be as person-centred as it possibly can be. Again, I won't go into the detail of that. We introduced an evaluation process. We did a baseline assessment in 1999 to actually get an idea of what our starting point was, so where were we? And that was a revelation. That was quite interesting, reporting that back, because I think this happens a lot in organisations, you tend to believe your own PR of it, that kind of idea that we're great and we do wonderful things, and again, we've got good staff, people live good lives. When we were able to report back, Jim and I, on the actual levels of engagement, which for some people were 0, people in terms of them actually being engaged in things, not just being there and not just staff talking to them and kind of socialising with people, but how much people were actually involved in the things going on around them. The range was really wide. People who were very able were kind of up there and 70 and 80%. People with profound disability, a large number of people, no actual engagement in the kind of the 2-hour period that we would have observed at that time. The implementation active support was fairly new in the organisation, but so clearly levels of that were very low. I think the other shocking thing for the organisation was the number of people that we were supporting who had significant challenges, who were presenting behaviour which challenged. I think our trustees thought that was just a small number of services, and it was quite a specialist thing. What we were able to tell them was that actually most services were supporting at least one person. And so that we then had to change our thinking about what training and support we were providing for people. And one of the big revelations over that time has been this issue about recognising the importance of practice leadership. I think when we started off with active support, we kind of in our heads knew that it was important that there were people there that were actually driving that and leading that and helping staff to interpret that in terms of what it meant in their own service. We didn't particularly attend to it. We didn't look at it. We started to gather some information about it, and it was a bit later that we kind of we could really pin it down into what it was and why it was important. So we know that, I mean, in terms of person-centred active support, but actually in terms of any kind of practice, any kind of actual practical what do staff need to do, it needs to be led. It needs, it needs someone there that's actually helping people to do it, to see how it actually works. And so frontline managers, whatever you call them, I know I've never quite got to grips in this week about who's who, but actually, whatever their title, you know who they are. It's the person that's the hands-on, the most frontline manager, the person that's around, the person that supervises their staff directly. That actually they're really important, and they're the key, And we started to recognise that where active support was happening, the main indicator of that, the main thing that drove that, was where there was a good practice leader. So we did a baseline in 1999, and then in 2005 we did a reassessment, and we had a number of services that improved. And what we could see by the information that we were gathering is that where those services improved, there was a good practice leader in place. And particularly important in terms of what that person did was whether that person regularly observed and fed back to staff. So whether they actually spent time watching staff and giving them information about what they were doing well and what they could do better. And where that happened on a regular basis, practice leadership was stronger, active support was better, engagement was higher. And also whether those people used the forums that they had to really focus in on the support that was being provided to people. So were they using supervisions and team meetings as a place to really talk about what actually happens, so that staff had an opportunity to talk about, well, this is working and I've learnt this and I can share this with other people, or this is not working, can someone help me to get this right? So we also found out at that time when we started looking at the data that where there were good practice leaders, there was also higher levels of job satisfaction from team members, and team members were clearer about their job. They knew what they needed to do, and it was very focused on supporting people. So they could clearly describe what it was that they needed to do day to day. Okay. So, using that information and work that Jim and Julie had done elsewhere, this is the kind of definition that's come about in terms of practice leadership. So I'll go through that a bit, I think. It's probably my next plan. So the first is really, and this is one of the really key things, and it's a big shift, I think, for lots of managers who've become the administrators. And again, my experience in United Responses in 1998, that's what had happened. Those people had become, not working hands-on, generally working Monday 9 to 5, often in an office that wasn't near the service. And that was a bit of a shift for some people, the idea of actually saying, no, actually that's not really what we want you to do. We want you to be here. So one of the key things is that practice leaders need to focus in all aspects of their work on the quality of life for people. And what's actually happening. So they're really focused in on what the reality is. So again, we can do all of this stuff. You could look at the file, someone's file, and you can see that there's a weekly planner that looks like they have a really busy week, and there's support plans that say all sorts of things are happening. But when you actually spend some time with people, what you realise is that's only a really small part of what's happening, or it's not what's really happening. It's what we say we do, but it's not what's actually happening for people. And good practice leaders actually focus really in on what's the actual experience of people. So what's their daily experience like? How engaged are they? What's going on? And also on the skills of staff. So they spend time focusing on what staff can do, what they can do already, what they can do well, and what they need help with. Yeah. So they need to spend time doing that, and they need to kind of do that quite overtly in terms of making it really clear that the message here, that this is the important thing. There are other things that go on, and there are meetings that managers have to attend, and there are reports that have to be written. But the message from the practice leader needs to be, through their words and their action, that the most important thing is supporting people every day. is getting that support right, is those minute by minute kind of interactions, the stuff that really matters to the people we support. Now the other stuff needs to be done, completely recognise that there is requirements for monitoring and there's requirements for reports and you need to go to meetings. But those things are actually only meant to support the work we do and continue to improve it. They're not the main point of the work, and I think we can lose sight of that in the pressures that kind of come in. And it's really important that practice leaders keep stepping back from that. Now, so one of the things that good practice leaders do is they have really good skills at kind of negotiating around some of that stuff so that they can actually keep the priority as what it needs to be. But also within organisations that support this, actually there's attention to when do we get to the point where that's a real problem and there is overload so that we can kind of deal with that. So there's this whole idea about people focusing in on what's really important, and that's the day-to-day stuff. I think there's also an element in focusing about helping teams interpret some of the bigger messages into what does that actually mean for me here as a support worker. So when I was referring earlier to the fact that in United Response normalisation had become this really simplified thing, I think the same could be true of lots of things. So we get staff who see this, choice is mentioned a lot. But how does that work? How does choice work for the person that I'm supporting? So, and that looks quite different for different people in different scenarios. So the way I present choices and the way I kind of receive information from a person we support with a mild disability who's living in his own house is completely different to the way that I would do that with someone with a profound disability who has no verbal communication, who has a significant physical disability and doesn't use any verbal communication. So it looks different, and I think quite often we're expecting staff to be able to figure out what that actually needs to look like. So one of the things that good practice leaders do is they clarify those expectations. They make it really clear that not only are we focused on what we're doing, but we're very clear about what it should look like here and what it should look like for individuals and how that will actually work. Okay. So the second thing that good practice leaders do is actually about allocating and organising the resources that we have, and to make sure that actually the support that people need and want is there when they want it and when they need it. That actually, using the biggest resource that we have for people that we're supporting is staff, as providers, is the staff. And it's amazing the number of times that I go into places and actually the staff are in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've lost count of the number of services that I've gone to where there's nobody at home. They've all gone out to the day service during the day. And I've walked in and found 3 staff members. And then the staff are saying to me, actually, it'd be really great if we just had enough staff for, Johnny to go down the pub at 10 o'clock when his mates are out. And I'm kind of thinking, well, actually you have. They're all there in the day doing nothing. It's about allocating and organising that. And I understand that that's complex. I worked with enough staff teams to know that, they have what we call rotas, which I've gathered you call rosters, yes, that they're used to, ways of working that suit them, that kind of work for them or have worked for the organisation for some time. And sometimes you have to disrupt those things quite a lot to kind of get people in the right place at the right time. But also I think it's also that, at its extreme end, it's what I did in that service in York. It's the, making sure that actually you've thought through what are the routines and things that are important for people, and how do we make sure those things are recognised on a daily basis? How are we sure that those are the things that actually are happening for people? So there are 2 kind of areas to think about in terms of when we're thinking about allocating and organising, and one is consistency. So this idea of getting staff to kind of, in some ways, give up their way of doing things and start thinking about doing things in a consistent way with people that will help them to actually be more in control of what's going on. And we do a lot of this without thinking. We do things our way. We have particular ways that we've developed of doing things. We do things at a pace that suits us or in an order that suits us as individuals. So I can, one of the examples that I can give you is I was in a service watching, doing an observation, and at the start of the observation, the guy's name was Anton, he's brilliant. The staff member said to Anton, do you want to come make a cup of tea? Anton has no verbal communication, he uses signing. But he knows how to make a cup of tea. He knows he's been in the kitchen, he's made enough cups of tea in his life to have a good idea of kind of what's happening. But he does need support to do that. He needs some prompting. So they went into the kitchen, got out the cup, put the kettle on, got the tea bag out, tea bag in the cup. And the staff member said to Anton, do you want to get the milk? It was a very small kitchen, he only had to turn around. Got the milk out. Anton put the milk down and started to unscrew the top of the milk and started to get ready to pour it into the cup. And the staff member said, no. You don't put the milk in the tea after you've put the water in, until you've made the tea. So, as he was told, he put it down and he waited. They put the water in, he made the tea. And off he went, his cup of tea, it's fine. About an hour later, a different member of staff said, Anton, do you want a cup of tea? He said, yep. So off they went into the kitchen. You will look at me, I can tell you, some people have heard the story already. So same process, exactly the same process, the stuff's out. Anton, do you want to get the milk? Turns around, he gets the milk, puts the milk down, and he waits. And the staff member goes, oh, come on, Anton, put the milk in the cup. Now, that's just one example of so poor Anton, he has to kind of figure out each time someone says, shall we make a cup of tea? He has to figure out, so which staff member is this? And how do they make a cup of tea? Because he's going to get, each time there's a 50% chance he's going to get it wrong, just with that one thing. Yeah? And that can happen to people throughout a day, this idea of having to figure out the different ways that staff do it. And the bigger the staff team, the more that happens. Yeah? And actually, as for staff, it's much easier for staff to learn one way to do something than it is for a person we support to learn 15 or 20 ways of doing something. Yeah? There are probably, just in making a bed, there are probably 20 variations. And so some of the stuff about actually that practice leaders do is look for where inconsistencies are problematic for people. So they would look at that situation with Anton and they would say, okay, so let's as a team actually agree how we're going to make tea. Is the milk going to go in before or after? And actually it doesn't matter whether you prefer the milk to go in before or after. Let's just agree the way that we're going to do it that suits Anton. So the onus is on staff to actually find a way that works for the person and then actually adapt the way they do it so they're consistent. Yes. Okay. And the second area is predictability. And this is something that I think, again going back to Doug's example, has a huge impact on people. And this is the idea that we know, you have a pretty good idea what's going to happen next. You all knew you were coming here today, you have a fair idea of what's going to happen. You've probably got a pretty good idea of what's going to happen when you leave here. It's Friday night, you've probably got a very good idea about what's going to happen when you leave here. Yeah. Down to the kind of detail of where you'll go next, who'll be there when you get there, if you're going out, what sorts of things you'll be doing. And that we do that all the time without thinking. And yet for lots of the people we support, that's not what life's like at all. They have no idea because other people are driving that. You have control of that. You're in charge of that, or the other people that might influence it. You are able to communicate freely with. That doesn't happen for lots of the people you support. So this sense of not really knowing. I'll give you another example. I was in a service where 2 nights in a row I went to the same house, and the first night I went. The shift leader was someone who was very organised, very efficient, and had a plan. She had a really good plan in her head. So these were people who were coming home from the day centre. They were all people who were probably severe learning disabilities, no verbal communication, no real challenging behaviour. They were had been conditioned to kind of pretty much accept what was going on around them. And they were coming home from the day centre. They came in at 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock there was a cup of tea. Everyone sat down and had a cup of tea. That's fairly standard practice in England. There's any transition period is usually a cup of tea time. So they had a cup of tea, and then straight after that there was a kind of a flurry of kind of activity, which was about people being bathed and kind of changed and getting kind of not getting into pyjamas necessarily, but kind of all of those personal care type things. And dinner had been prepared earlier while they'd been at the day centre, so it was all good to go. It was all in the oven cooking. And so by the time they had dinner and then they kind of relaxed afterwards, there was nothing left to do really. There was a kind of a bit of clearing up, which the staff member did while they watched television, and then it was kind of, that was it. That was chilled for the night. And I left straight after dinner, but I kind of got the sense that very little else was going to happen while I was there. Now I went to the same service the very next night, and this time there was a different person on shift. 2 staff were there, and the only thing that was the same was the cup of tea. So when people got home, they had a cup of tea. And after that, I kind of expected there to be some sort of movement, but there actually wasn't any. So everyone, and the staff sat, the people sat, and there was just this kind of chilled, relaxed, chatting, watching a bit of television. Nothing really happening. Got to about 6:15, and I was thinking, can't smell any food cooking, not quite sure what's going on here. Got to 6 o'clock, still no sign of food, no sign of all of the personal care stuff, all the stuff I'd seen that was such a kind of imperative the day before wasn't happening. Everyone was still fairly chilled and sitting around. I had to leave at 6:30, so I went to the staff and said, so can you just tell me what's happening for dinner? Because I just wanted to be sure that people are actually going to have something to eat. And they said, oh yeah, the handover earlier, which the handover, the staff room was away from the people we scored. We decided we'd get pizza. So, you know, when you go, we're going to order the pizza. Oh, sorry. We're going to order the pizza. And, you know, we'll have dinner about 7 o'clock. And I sat there thinking, these poor people, they're going to, on their way home from the day service, they're on the bus for about half an hour. In that whole half an hour, they're kind of sitting there. And if, you know, if they're able to kind of understand any of what's going on, or even if subconsciously this is what's going on. This idea that actually you have no idea who's going to be in your house when you get there. What are they going to expect you to do? What's it actually going to be like? You know, I mean, just in those situations, the pace, the kind of the pressure on people was completely different from one day to the other. Am I going to walk into that really super chilled and nothing to do kind of feel, or am I walking into this military position kind of, this is the way it's going to be? Again, the only thing those people could predict was a cup of tea. Now that's not much better than the situation those people were in when they were in the hospital. Yeah. But in talking to staff, it was this idea of, well, we just go with the flow. That was the reasoning for that. So predictability is important, and getting predictability in, and that's one of the things that practice leaders need to do. They need to find a way to recognise the important routines and the kind of the flow of the day that works for people, and then again make it incumbent on staff to follow that rather than their own routines or their own way of doing things, so that things become predictable for people. And that's one of the key things that they need to do. So I've been talking for a little bit. I've got some video which I'm hoping is going to work about a practice leader.
The main part of practice leadership, or what I've found is practice leadership, people have asked us before what sort of style or approach I have, and I think the style and approach, the main thing is to be there. Not to be a manager who just sits in the office. As it happens, I am sitting in the office at the moment, but I like to be out there. So if people go to hydrotherapy or they go on an outing or anything, and they come into the office and my door's always open, and the staff will say, Dennis, when we be short today, would you like to come along? I'll try if it's possible to drop anything to go along, because what I can do from that is 2 things. I'm always being involved with the people we support, in their lives constantly change, so I'm involved with the changes in their life, but I'm also there to observe the staff and give them feedback on different things. Because you know that you like it cool and you've got nothing there, Joe. Now what we'll do, Joe, is get a different cup, because I know you don't like this.
Joe, is that what you're doing, Dennis?
Well, it's just what I do with Joe is sometimes, because I know that he likes it cool, doesn't really like hot tea, but he doesn't like the cup hot neither. And what I've found in the past is if you put the tea in the cup and the cup gets hot on the outside, Joe then, because he thinks it's hot, tips the tea down the sink. So if you change over the cup's nice and cool on the outside. Hey, Joseph, is that okay?
Actually, that was quite an interesting thing for me to see, because what that was, when Joe has a cup of tea, he doesn't like it too hot, and if the cup's really hot on the outside, he can sometimes just throw it away because he thinks the tea's going to be hot. So what Dennis did was he poured it in, made the tea in one cup, poured it into that cup so the outside of the cup was cool, so that Joe doesn't then have the heat on his hands, so he doesn't think that it's going to be hot, so just throw it away, he tastes it first.
I told Dennis before I came here, that's the manager, that I was going to make him an international star. So, Dennis is one of the practice leaders in United Response, and he's a really good example of someone who's a really good coach, and he models good support all of the time. He's got a real focus on being there and around to watch staff working, to give them feedback, to help them to kind of continue to improve. And you can see both kind of coaching and modelling in that clip, in terms of that, there are times when he'll step back and watch, and then he'll give the staff, just, another thing to get better at. There are probably other things within that clip that I would also be thinking, oh, that you might want to tell them that, but actually sometimes it's better not to overload staff with too many things. But good practice leaders are good coaches. Most staff learn best by seeing it in action, by actually having the real experience of how this, translate what this looks like for the person that I'm supporting. We can send staff on loads of training and it won't make any difference to their actual practice. The thing that makes the big difference is when there's someone like Dennis around who's helping you actually see how that works and reinforcing that and coaching you in getting that better all the time. The second example with the cup, I love the thing about the cold cup. I think that's a brilliant tip. That's kind of one of those. I think that's really great and it works really well for Joe. But that's another example of he's just there doing it, and actually staff will come up and ask him, what are you doing, how does that work? And Dennis is just someone who's really good. If he's got 5 minutes, he'll come out of the office and spend time with people. And again, if people ask him, he's more than happy to drop the paperwork to come and do something else. So good practice leaders are actually good coaches. They're people who create an environment where that's what happens. And we've been talking about this over the last few days with, I've been talking to people about it, and I think this is one of the kind of areas where staff actually find this quite difficult, because quite often the only time that staff are observed and get feedback that closely, outside of when you start the job, is when you're in trouble. Yeah, that close scrutiny is usually associated with some sort of disciplinary type action. Whereas what we really want is a situation where people are used to that that's the way they work, and that they do that all the time, because it's about helping each other, because it's about improving the quality of support. So continually kind of doing that. And so good practice leaders create an environment where that's what they do. And they model that so that other staff will do it with each other as well. So they create a situation where that's what's happening for people. Okay, there are other things that practice leaders need to do around reviewing, and as I said, the focus of what they're looking at and the key indicator for them about whether things are going well or not is people's actual experience. So the day by day, the moment by moment experience of the people that they're supporting, and then using what they find out about that to actually feed into other kind of systems. And supervision's a really important one of those. And my experience with supervision is that it's quite easy for that to be overtaken by other things. You quite often end up with, that's the forum where you're telling the staff member about the latest policy, or you're making sure that they filled out this form, or, whereas actually this is the one chance that practice leaders have really to sit down with people in a one-to-one situation, talking about how it's really going. Yeah. And if you can link that to the stuff that we saw Dennis doing. So if the manager has, or the practice leader has also very recently watched that staff member working, so really seen what's happening, you can have a real conversation in one-to-one about what's actually going on. It's not that kind of, how's it going? And it all seems to be okay. You can have very detailed conversations about what's actually working for people, and staff can have conversations about what help they need to make that happen. In United Response, our supervision policy is actually that you have to do at least 2 what are called observational supervisions a year. So actually where the meeting is swapped for an observation and feedback. But you can actually do that, because supervision's monthly, but you can actually do that so you can have 1 month where it's an observation, and the next month where it's an actually sit-down meeting. So kind of getting that to happen. But it's an important place to actually to look at what's working for people, to help people improve their practice. It's a good place to make sure that actually individual staff are signed up to your vision, or people's vision of what they want, that their goals and their, what they understand the job to be matches with what the practice leader or the service expects. It's an opportunity for you to celebrate success with people. I think lots of staff don't ever get the opportunity to kind of just say, I think this is going really well, or for someone to point out the stuff that's going really well, because we're quite reactive in our approach to staff. If they're doing a good job, we tend to let them get on with it, and it's usually only when there's something going wrong that we so it's about kind of turning that round really, and it's about really focusing that time on improving the person's skills or their confidence, and enabling them to go out and do a better job. And then the other area is team meetings. So using team meetings, again, as the time that you've got, it's a very precious time, and it's a time when you can get people together to collectively look at what's working. Again, celebrate the things that have gone well, but also pick up things that aren't working and help each other figure them out. Learn from each other. Certain staff are good at some things and other staff are good at other things. So sharing, one staff member is really, really good at, supporting John in the supermarket. Actually having some time and space to explain how that works and to get other people to be able to do that consistently. It's a really good forum to make sure that that's what happens. And it's a really good, doing that face-to-face is much better than writing 20 support plans, bits of paper. Actually, face-to-face discussion and kind of group agreement is much better than giving people loads of directives and plans to work to and kind of things to work with. And again, team meetings, the priority of team meetings needs to be the work that we're doing, the people that we're supporting. And they're so easily, again, overtaken by things. In United Response, we did in order to try and avoid that, we did this piece of work that was about saying, quite often team meetings were about things that were coming from the organisation, so things we'd said that staff needed to know about. And it was taking up a lot of time in team meetings across the country, so we developed this thing called the all-staff briefing. So once a month, there's kind of someone summarises the kind of messages coming from the organisation and sorts them into things like need to know and nice to know, and it's sent to every member of staff. And the idea is that, it's about taking some responsibility. They read it themselves. I went to a team meeting recently where the manager sat there and read through the all-staff briefing. And it took up half an hour of a 1.5 hour meeting. And I just thought, well, that's kind of, that's not it. So it's, because that time's precious, it's about saying, actually, let's push the other things back and make sure we've got time to really focus in on what team members actually have to do, and to help them to get more confident at doing that. Okay, so when we talk about practice leadership and all of the stuff that I've been saying, I've been talking about those kind of frontline people, those frontline managers. But actually, I think that to really develop person-centred approaches, whether it's active support or whether it's all of those other things, positive behaviour support, person-centred thinking, all of those types of things, actually it has to become part of the organisational kind of requirement. So actually, you need more than just frontline practice leaders. You need practice leaders throughout the organisation. And everyone in an organisation has some practice leadership responsibility. All layers of management, everyone in that system has some responsibility for that. Because if people aren't recognising it further up, it'll disappear. It'll because other priorities will start to take over. And we get carried away, with other things. Other things happen. Things happen out there in the big world that means that organisations can lose focus on this. And managers, frontline managers can't keep this up if they're getting pressure to do other things from other places. So I think it's about actually saying who are our primary practice leaders, if you like, but also what are other people's responsibilities in terms of practice leadership in the organisation. We kind of work on the basis that kind of area managers and service managers, so the people above those frontline workers, those directly people above. They have responsibility for working with service managers and team leaders to do problem solving, to kind of work out where there are kind of competing priorities and things that might get in the way of them actually focusing on what we want. That they do some objective evaluation of the service, so actually they're spending some time. Our area managers are required to kind of go into services, not just check the paperwork, but actually go and sit and do some observational stuff. Service managers definitely have to do it in their services. And that's really important because it keeps them connected. But I think the other thing is it's a really important message about what's important. You know, my manager or my boss doesn't just come here and check the paper. They're interested and they want to know what we're doing. This is the most important thing. Yeah. So there's that message kind of throughout about that. So they should model good practice. And one of the key things I think that people do further up the hierarchy is this business about recruitment. You know, if they're focused on practice leadership, then they're recruiting the right people into the jobs. Yeah. Our most successful kind of areas in United Response are where we've got a divisional director who knows about this, who's very committed to it, who's very person-centred, who knows all about person-centred approaches and the reality of making that work, and knows what practice leadership is, and is looking for that. And so therefore when she appoints, she's appointing at service manager level, or area manager level, and then service manager, then actually she's appointing those people. She's appointing the right people with the right values and the right approach. And then they appoint the right people, so it kind of works throughout the system that way. And I think people further up in the organisation have responsibilities as well. So we do work with our trustees, with our directors, that's about saying, again, this is about when you get out there and you're talking to people, we want you to actually focus on what's really happening for people. Spend some time observing, talking to staff about what's going on. Don't go out on visits and just sit in the office. Yeah. You need to get out there and show that United Response really believes that this is the most important thing, and that's what you as a trustee are interested in. And that actually, celebrate success with people, talk to people about what they're doing, find out more about what they're doing. Yeah. We also obviously clearly expect trustees and directors to, in their thinkings about the organisation and their planning and their work, to have, that actual result as the main thing. This idea that organisations just believe their own PR actually can start at that level. Yeah. And if a trustee doesn't know kind of what's actually, have some experience of what's actually happening kind of on the ground, how can they actually be leading the organisation? And the same is true of directors. So I recently had the director of IT. We have a new director of IT. And it was brilliant. She came and spent half a day with me just wanting to know about active support, about positive behaviour support, about when she went to services, what should she be looking for, what sorts of questions should she be asking. Now, this is someone has come to us with no idea about these things, but she's very, very keen. And that's one of the reasons that she came to United Response, because she wants to be able to also connect with what's going on and sees that it's really important that she understands that, so that actually her work is informed by that. So I think practice leadership throughout an organisation is also really important. So we've been for a long time now actually kind of working on initially active support, but then that range of approaches. So working on our person-centred support. But one of the key things for that, and for me, has been this issue about practice leadership. And so we've put a lot of kind of time and resources into that. And we have to think about that in terms of how do we skill those people up and keep them going. And I think that's going to be one of the important things for you guys in the future in terms of developing your services in the way that's kind of been envisaged here. And I think that's me.